Dear Sayasat, welcome to Amanat Time. Thank you so much for finding time to come to us. And today we are going to talk about the time which we are having in Kazakhstan at the moment, elections 2019. And as you know, so these elections are very unique ones. And could you please mention the three specific characteristics of these elections from your point of view?
Well, current elections are different. I would say, well, you say free, so let's start with one. I think these are the first elections that we have in a very different atmosphere. I think the political culture of Kazakhstan is changing. It's quite a historical moment we're having here. You see, what happened is that for the first time in the last 30 years, we had an event, what is called life-changing event or critical event. And there's been a lot of events in history of humankind, like fall of Berlin Wall, 9/11, but this time, sometimes it's like big tragic event. It's a Chernobyl, or civil war, or something that changes minds of a lot of people. In our country, something quite unusual happened, and it was 19th of March, when our first president, the founding father of modern Kazakhstan, has stepped down. And it never happened before. I mean, we never had a period, and it's been like 19 hours after he made this public announcement on all the national TV channels that he's stepping down. And for 19 hours, country was without political leadership, so to speak. And then the acting president, Mr. Tokayev, he was inaugurated almost a day later. So that really changed, I would dare say, political culture. There was a major shift in understanding, in assessing the current political reality for many people in Kazakhstan. And I think this is the beginning of a very important shift in political culture, in way people perceive the political reality in Kazakhstan. I'm not sure about the current elections, but I'm quite sure next elections, the coming elections, would be very different by model, by standards, by public awareness, by number of candidates maybe. But even these elections, the elections that are upon us, they have the biggest number of candidates. I mean, before that we had a very limited number of candidates. So that's a good sign of growing political competition, I would say. Another quite interesting thing characteristic thing about these elections is finally the wave, if you look at on a global scale, starting from Obama's campaign in 2008, the candidates were heavily using social networks, but heavily focusing and targeting younger social groups by using social media, by using, let's say, alternative media channels, not the traditional ones, conventional ones. So in that sense, these are the first elections that we see that follow the same model. And then we had UK elections, we had Germany's chancellor elections, we had Narendra Modi's elections in India, and Thailand elections, and in Australia and New Zealand elections. So that wave has finally come here, and social networks are becoming quite important in informing the public agenda, in getting to that smaller social groups, public outreach, and things like that. So these would be the third characteristics I would emphasize that affect the current election campaign.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. As we know, you are a very famous person in Kazakhstan, and you have many friends in other countries. What can you tell me about their opinion? What do you think about our upcoming election?
Well, it's quite, yes, there's certain interest. Why? because there's been what it's called the election period. So we've seen some big elections in Indonesia. There are upcoming elections in India. There were quite famous and very internationally covered elections in Ukraine. So there's quite big interest to what will happen in Kazakhstan, and why there's such a big interest. For the first time, there is no Nazarbayev. I mean, the current, the first president is not running. So that creates a lot of interest. So a lot of people, a lot of my friends at least, they asking, they're very curious, what would be the transition after Nazarbayev? Is there any future without Nazarbayev? Yeah. Current, the acting president and one of the up-running candidates, Mr. Tokayev, is quite well known. I mean, he's being in UN, he's being an ambassador. He has more public international coverage than many other public figures in Kazakhstan. So that's another buzz. Okay, we know the guy who's speaking on behalf of the United Nations and so on and so forth. So I'd say there's quite big interest. People are quite curious, and there is a hope. There is some expectation, great expectation, I'd say. So will it be the turning point in large-scale reforms in Kazakhstan? Will it be a turning point in opening up, in bringing more transparent, more democratic standards into public domain of Kazakhstan? So that's quite interesting. And of course, there are a lot of speculations on how the relations between Russia and Kazakhstan and China and Kazakhstan and other world would change or not change after the elections.
And talking about young generation, and you've mentioned how important this layer is. So you work a lot with the youth, and could you please comment on the fact that comparing to other countries, Kazakhstani youth is very active, but not very active in politics. So there is kind of like statement that, for example, they are very active in social media. So there are a lot of like platforms for the young generation to express their opinion. But in fact, we can state that from political point of view, they are not very active.
Mm-hmm. I think it is changing. It was true several years ago. We would see a lot of people, a lot of younger people who would, yes, be quite active in social networks, but when it comes to real-time activity, when it comes to real-time actions, you wouldn't see much of that happening. But what I see now, that change I mentioned in political culture that is happening now, I think it is mostly related to younger people. We've seen some quite interesting acts of political activism, and this thing with the empty banner was quite clever, actually. I mean, I was talking to a couple of my friends from France and Americans, very seasoned journalists, I mean, very experienced people, and they were like, wow, this guy is genius. I mean, going out there with empty banner, it was very symbolic, it was very clever. I mean, so you couldn't really, find anywhere, and it was very symbolic. It got the message, and there's nothing you could do with it. And a lot of these people was think, wow, this guy is just genius, and so it was so clever. And this year, it's quite interesting. We have about 11 million registered voters, and almost 2.5 million of them are younger people. So that would be almost one third of voters would be younger people, and that'll be the first time they'll be voting. So that, I think, will, if they really participate in elections, we will, for the next election cycle, we'll get much more activism. We'll get new public figures emerging. We'll get new movements, public movements. We'll have some grassroots organizations popping up, everywhere. And I think this particular generation, which is born in Kazakhstan, we would say this is the independent generation, the generation of independent Kazakhstan, of ages turning 18 and 20. They have quite different mentality. I mean, I'm giving a lot of public lectures. I'm talking to a lot of students in college level, school level, university level. They are very different in how they see things, how they perceive things. They have much larger internal demand for public action, for freedom, for transparency. And I think this demand will be growing.
As you noticed in the social media platform on Facebook, many people tried to boycott these upcoming elections. And there were many videos and public articles. And what can you say about the mood of people?
Well, I think it's very mixed. Yes, especially in the region, it's quite mixed. People have a lot of mixed feelings. And it's normal, I mean, because we haven't seen such big and abrupt changes in years. I mean, boom, all of a sudden, March 19, the first president resigns. In less than a day, you have a new acting president who's being inaugurated. In less than a month, you have snap elections being declared. In less than 2 months, you having these elections, you have election campaigns. So there's so much change people can take in, right? So there's just so much going on, and I think people have a lot of mixed feelings. On one hand, there's a hope. There are a lot of great expectations. Oh, there'll be big changes. On the other hand, the problems are there. I mean, we have a lot of economic problems that have accumulated. So there are, so to say, very negative expectations as well. Like, what will happen? What will change? Will the new president be able to solve the problems? And then we see there's this accumulated tension, yeah, that the economic situation is not improving. So I think there are a lot of mixed feelings, and some people say, well, look, nothing's going to change, yeah. And of course, the first actions of the acting president were not perceived equally by everyone. There was a lot of criticism. There was a lot of negative assessment, so to speak, that people said, well, look, this is not what he should be doing, the acting president, the running candidate from the ruling party. He should be focusing more on tackling the real-time problems. So there is, I think, this mixed expectation may affect the elections, because first thing I think we're failing to do is to get very strong message on concrete actions. I think the candidates should have focused more on real-time problems. You see, there's certain disbelief, there's this accumulated disbelief that there's been too much declaration, there's been too many public promises which were never fulfilled, and there's so much focus on strategy, and there's so much focus on like big national interest themes rather than on some small time but real time problems. And someone who would just go in and start solving these problems, small ones, one by one, will be the one to regain the trust. And I think the biggest issue, the most crucial issue we have right now is regaining the public trust. Because without public trust, none of the measures, none of the actions that any of the candidates who would win, and a new president who would win, he would need that most crucial component, public trust. And you regain your public trust by two simple measures. One, accepting mistakes. So people will have to see, okay, we made some mistakes, and that's what we did. We have to accept it. Yeah, we have to change certain courses of action. And two, starting small, tackling and solving real-time problems. So people will, okay, so at least there's something small, not huge, but it's done. It's executed. It's, you know, and now I can see they're able to do these things. They're able to perform. So I think the candidates should really focus more on this. And since we haven't seen much real-time action, so there's this disbelief, distrust, which is continuing.
And you've mentioned that the trust, this public trust, is very important, and this is one of the main focus which civil platform Amanat is claiming, like to solve or just to regain, help to regain. And as we know, so you are an active member of Amanat platform. Could you please tell us why have you made this decision to join this platform, and what is your main role in this?
Yeah, well, my personal desire, intention, I would say, was, you see, I've seen that this moment in our political culture and history is very crucial. We see the first shift, the first change in political culture. And I think we need civil platforms, you know, grassroots organizations like Amanat that would help to support that new culture. You see, culture is something very sensitive. You can't really build it really quickly. You have to nurture it. It has to be supported, it has to be nurtured, it has to grow. You can't really construct it in a short period of time. And I think this is a very important beginning that is happening with this 19th of March announcement. And my major involvement would be in bringing analytical culture, I mean, in bringing in the professional voice, and bringing in some cold, bipartisan, objective information and analytics, providing it to all the parties involved, giving out independent platforms to all the experts, especially independent experts, who are left out of discussion, who are left out of debate, who are not provided quality information, who are limited in their coverage. Because every voice must be heard if we want to build a quality, different kind of political culture. It has to be bipartisan, it has to be objective, it has to involve all the parties, it has to build new culture of dialogue and debate and discussions and collective action. So I think if we at least support these humble beginnings, we have some hopes. We might have a chance to grow as society to a very different level, to a new level of understanding and collective action.
And what are the main results of Amanat platform and the whole this movements, let's say?
Yeah.
Can you?
Well, there are many results, and but I would focus on two really, I would say, outstanding results. One is Amanat platform was able to train thousands and thousands of independent observers, civil observers. I think it's a great thing, and one interesting thing that I've noticed that a lot of people have volunteered, and it was not top-down approach. They have approached the Amanat, they've heard the call. There is a growing urge that I can make a difference, and this is very important. This is how collective action begins. This is how a public political culture is built, with an urge, with clear individual understanding that I can make a difference. I can make this call. I have to take the responsibility. And second, I would say that we were able to establish this bi-directional channel of information with the public. Because it is also important when people have something to say. There is this urge to publicly engage, and then there's no channels or platforms where you can make that public call. I think it's important. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.